Rafael Castellano was still holding the velvet box when he heard his fiancée's voice through the dressing room door. He'd come 40 minutes early, only to leave the gift on her vanity before the party began, a necklace that had belonged to his mother, the one thing in a 22-room house he hadn't bought with money. Gus offered to walk in with him. He said no. He said, "This is the one thing I want to do myself." That sentence saved his life. Inside, Sloane was laughing. She wasn't laughing with him. And the man's voice answering her wasn't his, it belonged to the lawyer he trusted more than anyone alive. The only other man whose signature sat on every dollar the Castellano family owned. Rafael stood still in the dark, among silk dresses hanging in silence, one hand still closed around that velvet box, and listened to the woman carrying the child he had already named say 11 words. "By Monday morning, everything his father built carries your name." Then she laid a hand on her stomach. He could hear the silk shift against silk, and added 4 more that made him forget how to breathe. "So does the baby." 41 minutes. That's how long Rafael Castellano stood motionless in that darkness, listening to 2 strangers divide his life the way you'd divide a cake, and learning 3 things that 10 years at the top of Boston had never taught him: that the child wasn't his, that you don't need a knife to kill a man, only his own signature on a page he couldn't be bothered to turn, and that in this city the only thing more dangerous than your enemy is the person you never thought to suspect. He didn't pound on the door. He didn't shout. He didn't turn over a single table. He simply took out his phone, pressed record, and held it against his chest where his heart was beating so slowly. He wondered whether it was beating at all. Then he did the one thing nobody in Boston would have believed Rafael Castellano capable of. He set the velvet box down on her vanity, leaving it behind for good, and walked out through the service stairs without making a sound. People always imagined betrayal as a scream, a fist, a man tearing a room apart. But real betrayal isn't loud, it's cold, it's quiet. It turns your blood into arithmetic. 3 weeks later, 200 people would stand in a glass ballroom overlooking Boston Harbor, raising their glasses to Sloane Ashford's 30th birthday. Not one of them knew that the man who paid for that party, who chose every song, who wrote every line on every invitation, was also the man who chose who would be standing at each exit. This is the story of those 41 minutes. If this story found you tonight, leave the words "Table 6." In the comments, hit like, share it with someone you think needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel, so there's always a story waiting for you. The way a cup of coffee waits for someone who always comes back. At 6 o'clock that evening, an hour and a half before he stepped into the dressing room in Beacon Hill, Rafael Castellano was standing inside a warehouse in Chelsea, watching a man drink coffee. Boston in October contained 2 cities. The first lay across the river, where the glass towers of the seaport cast the evening light down across the harbor, where wives in cashmere sweaters walked along the waterfront and discussed private schools for their children. The second city began here, in Chelsea, north of the Tobin Bridge, where rows of corrugated metal warehouses sat motionless beneath the flight path of Logan Airport, where every 3 minutes another plane passed so low that it rattled the broken panes of glass in the ceiling. The smell here was diesel fuel mixed with sea salt and frozen fish. No one took leisurely walks along anything. Rafael Castellano owned property in both cities, but he only conducted business in the second. Duke Ferraro sat on a metal folding chair in the middle of the warehouse, beneath a single light bulb. There were no ropes. No one was holding his shoulders. Both of his hands were completely free, and in his right hand was a paper cup of coffee that was still hot, complete with a lid and a cardboard sleeve to keep it from burning him. That was what made it terrifying. Had there been ropes, Duke Ferraro would have understood where he stood in the story. A man who was tied up was a man about to be beaten. A man who was tied up could still hope, but a man who was given coffee knew nothing at all. A man who was given coffee had to sit there and wonder why. He had been sitting there wondering for 22 minutes. Coffee was still hot because every 10 minutes someone brought him a fresh cup, and no one said a single word while doing it. 3 refrigerated shipping containers. That was all Duke Ferraro had taken. 3 containers of frozen lobster that were supposed to leave the port for Halifax, but had gone to Providence instead. With the money from the sale deposited into an account Duke believed no one would ever find. 48 hours. That was how long Beatrix and DA needed to locate it, and she had told Rafael that she almost felt embarrassed charging him for something so easy. The warehouse door opened. Duke looked up. Rafael Castellano walked in alone. No one followed him. He wore a charcoal gray suit with exactly 1.5 centimeters of white cuff showing at each wrist, and there was no watch on either of them. He didn't look at Duke. He pulled a folding table closer, set it down between them, and sat on its edge. "Would you like more sugar?" Rafael asked. Duke Ferraro didn't answer. His mouth opened, then closed again. Rafael reached inside his jacket and took three things. He placed them on the table beside one another, perfectly aligned, with the same care a person might use when setting out knives and forks. The first was Duke Ferraro's passport. Duke looked at it, and the color drained from his face, because that passport had been lying inside the drawer of his bedside table at his home in Revere, beneath a box of medicine and a notebook filled with passwords. The second was an airline ticket, one way, Boston to Lisbon, departure at 9 o'clock that night. The third was a thicker bundle of papers held together with a black binder clip. Duke had to lean forward to read it. It was a lease agreement. 3 years, an apartment in the Alfamfa district of Lisbon. Signed, paid in full. Duke Ferraro stared at the 3 items for a long time. At the cup of coffee, his hand began to tremble. "Your wife teaches piano," Rafael said. "There's a conservatory there." I checked outside. An airplane passed overhead. The entire warehouse shook. Neither man looked up. "You thought I came here to frighten you," Rafael said when the roar of the engines had faded. "No, I came to show you how thoroughly I've studied your life." He touched the edge of the passport with one finger and nudged it slightly until it lined up perfectly with the other 2 items. "I know your wife's name. I know where she teaches. I know she wanted to move away twice, and both times you told her you didn't have the money. I know all of that, Duke, and I used it to buy a ticket. Not to buy fear." Duke Ferraro opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "That's the distance between me and the people you just sold my merchandise to," Rafael said. "Do you understand? The people in Providence wouldn't give you coffee. The people in Providence know your wife's name too, but they would use that name differently. I don't doubt that. I never do that. It isn't because I'm kind. It's because once you've done something like that, there's nothing left for you to do, and I prefer keeping something in reserve." He rose from the edge of the table. "The flight leaves at 9 o'clock. Duke Ferraro looked at him. Then he looked at the 3 documents. Then he placed the cup of coffee on the concrete floor, very carefully, as though spilling it now would be the final mistake of his life. And he picked up all 3 items with both hands. "Why?" Duke said. His voice had gone hoarse. "Why didn't you?" "Because you'll be in Lisbon," Rafael said. "And in Lisbon, every morning when you wake up, you'll remember who gave you the bed you're lying in. But if I chose the other way, you wouldn't remember anything at all. Dead men don't owe anyone." Duke Ferraro walked toward the door. He moved very slowly at first, then faster, and by the time he reached the entrance, he was almost running. Rafael stood alone beneath the light bulb. He bent down, picked up the cup of coffee Duke had left on the floor, and placed it on the table. Outside, Augustine Rourke was waiting beside the car, with his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. He was 66 years old, with close-cropped silver hair, and he had spent 37 years behind the wheel for the Castellano family. He had opened the rear door the moment he heard running out of the warehouse. Rafael adjusted his left cuff, then his right. "Take me to Beacon Hill," he said. "I have a necklace to put on someone." Gus nodded. Then he spoke in an ordinary voice, the way someone might ask about the weather. "You want me to go in with you?" Rafael had already settled into the back seat. He looked through the window toward the lights across the river, toward the first city, where glass towers rose above the water and wives wore cashmere. "No," he said. "This is something I want to do alone." Gus closed the car door. Those were the last words Rafael Castellano spoke before his life ended. He didn't go home. The 22-room house in Weston was a 25-minute drive away, with 3 members of the staff and an alarm system worth more than most people in Boston earned in a year. And Rafael Castellano didn't think about it for even a second. He didn't call Beatrix either. He didn't call Gus, though Gus was waiting for him in the parking lot behind the Beacon Hill mansion, sitting in the car with the lights off, and would remain there for another 40 minutes before he received a message telling him to go home. Rafael walked 3 blocks, retrieved the car he had left in a public garage because he never parked his own vehicle in front of someone else's house, and drove. He didn't decide where he was going. His hands decided for him. He took Starrow Drive, turned into the tunnel, came out on the south side, and when he finally looked up, he saw the pale yellow neon sign on Congress Street. Ollie's. Half the letter I had been missing since the previous spring, and no one had bothered to repair it. 2:47 in the morning. He parked, turned off the engine, and sat motionless in the darkness for about 10 seconds before opening the door. Inside, the diner was empty. An old man at the counter was nodding off over his newspaper. The coffee machine was humming. The air smelled of hot grease and the lemon scent of floor cleaner. Raphael walked straight to the corner booth, the 6th table from the door, where the seat had its back against the wall and offered a clear view of both exits, and he sat down. Delphine Marchetti came out of the kitchen, holding a coffee pot without needing to look toward the corner. She circled around the right side of the table, set the tray on the right edge, turned a cup upright, and poured. She didn't ask whether he wanted coffee. In 7 months, she hadn't asked him that question once. "You look like a man who just lost a lawsuit," she said. "Worse," he said. She stopped pouring and looked at him for about a second, then finished filling the cup. She didn't ask what could be worse than that. It had taken Rafael Castellano the first 3 months to understand that about this woman. She didn't refrain from asking because she didn't care. She refrained because she had lived long enough on the other side of polite questions to know that most of them were merely a way for people to ask permission to hear your story. Her mother had once told her, when she was a child, that people came to diners to be left alone. She had remembered those words. She handed him a menu even though they both knew he wouldn't open it. "Fried eggs," he said. "With what? With fried eggs?" "No." She pulled the pen from her bun. "You're going to eat fried eggs, and you're to eat the grilled tomatoes too, so don't look at me like that. You've already paid for them. They come with the meal. If you don't eat them, I'll have to throw them away, and I hate wasting food." He looked at her. In 20 years, only 3 people in the world had dared tell Rafael Castellano that he was going to do something he had no intention of doing, and 2 of them were dead. The 3rd stood before him now, about 5 feet 3 inches tall, her brown hair tied back with a stretched elastic band, her white sneakers yellowed with age, waiting for his answer with the expression of someone prepared to stand there all night. "Fine," he said. She wrote it in her small notebook, tore off the page, and walked away. He sat there with his coffee. He placed both hands on the table and looked at them, and they weren't trembling. That was the only detail from that night that made him afraid of himself. The eggs arrived 7 minutes later. There were grilled tomatoes. He ate everything, including the tomatoes, and while he ate, he realized it was his first meal in 11 hours, and that the hunger had been inside him through all 41 minutes in the darkness, without his ever knowing it was there. "Eat," she had told him on the first night, 7 months earlier, when he sat down at this table for the first time and didn't touch his plate. "Everything is easier when you aren't hungry." She came back to collect the plate. She circled around the right side. She set the check down, picked it up again, held it close to her face to check the amount, then placed it back on the table. $4.50. "Table 6, she said. "Are you all right?" He looked up. Beyond the window, Congress Street was completely empty. A taxi passed and disappeared. The phone was still in his coat pocket, and inside that phone were 41 minutes whose existence no one else in the world knew about. He could have told her then. She would have listened. She wouldn't have asked anything more. That was probably why he said nothing. "I'm fine," he said. She nodded, picked up the plate, and walked away. He left a $20 bill and didn't wait for the change, as he did every night. When he reached the car, he sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. 3:18 in the morning. He took out his phone and called Beatrix and DIA. Beatrix and DIA arrived at headquarters at 4:45, wearing the same clothes she had worn the day before, because she slept at the office 3 nights a week and had done so for 3 years. 33 years old, a former financial investigator, and the only person in that interview years ago who had dared tell Rafael Castellano that his records contained 4 gaps, that she would list them for free, but repairing them would cost him. He hired her that same day. Now she sat across from him in the 9th floor room. The door closed, every light turned off except one, and she put on the headphones. Raphael pushed the phone across the table toward her and said nothing. She looked at him for a second, then pressed the button. 41 minutes. She listened to all of it. She didn't skip ahead, she didn't pause. She took no notes, and that was what Raphael noticed, because Beatrix and Di took notes on everything, even meetings she considered meaningless. She sat perfectly still, both hands resting flat on the tabletop, and at the 29th minute, the minute when Marguerite Ashford's voice appeared, he saw her close her eyes for a moment before opening them again. Outside, the sky above the harbor was changing from black to the color of lead. When the recording ended, she removed the headphones, placed them on the table, and said nothing for about 10 seconds. Then she looked up. "You've just committed a felony," she said. He didn't understand at first. He had spent 2 hours sitting in darkness, and in his mind that file was a gun, a bomb, the only thing standing between him and destruction, and now the highest-paid woman in his company was looking him directly in the eyes and telling him something entirely different. "Massachusetts," she said. Section 99. This state requires consent from both parties to record a private conversation. Both. Not one. You secretly recorded 3 people inside a locked room in their private home, and none of those 3 people knew you were standing there. She pushed the phone back toward the center of the table, and he watched it lying there beneath the light. This can't be used in court. It can't be used with a prosecutor. It can't be used with the board of directors if the other side has a lawyer who knows how to read. And the other side has Preston Hale. She said the name as though it were ordinary, and it was precisely that ordinariness that made it cut. "This isn't a weapon, sir. It's a pair of handcuffs. And you locked them around your own wrists 41 minutes before you even understood what you were doing." Rafael Castellano had sat in many rooms and heard many pieces of bad news. He knew what it felt like when bad news struck the chest. This didn't strike his chest. It struck somewhere lower, somewhere no one had reached in 20 years. And for about 3 seconds, he understood that the one instinct he trusted, the instinct that had automatically taken out the phone in the darkness without needing his command, the instinct he had been secretly proud of all night, was the very thing that had handed his enemy their first gift. He didn't strike the table. He said nothing for a while. Then he lowered his voice, and Beatrix and Diaye knew exactly what that meant, because everyone in the building knew. "Then find me something else," he said. "All right," she said. "But first I need you to answer one question, and I need you to answer honestly, because everything I do over the next 3 weeks will depend on it." She rested both elbows on the table. "Do you want them destroyed, or do you want your assets preserved? Because those 2 goals require 2 different schedules. Destruction is fast and loud, and while everything is loud, they'll finish transferring the shares. Preserving the assets is slow, and slow means you'll have to sit across from her at dinner for another 3 weeks and smile." Raphael looked out the window. Across the harbor a crane began to turn. "The assets first," he said. Beatrix and Diaye gave one brief nod. "Good," she said. "That means we can win." She pulled her notebook toward her, and only then did she begin to write. "So what do you want me to find? I've searched the entire internal system twice this year. There's nothing. He's the head of compliance. He designed the system I used to investigate him." Raphael turned back toward her. "That's exactly why I won't find anything there," he said. "You're searching as though he were a thief. He isn't a thief. He's a lawyer. Thieves hide things in safes. Where do lawyers hide things?" Beatrix's pen stopped. "Find what a good lawyer would hide in the place where good lawyers hide things," he said. "Not in a safe." In the public record, she looked at him for a long time. Then she wrote a single word in her notebook, underlined it twice, and stood. It would take her 9 days. 9 days of searching through 7 states, 3,200 registrations, and 4 shell companies that led nowhere. But what he had said at 12 minutes past 5 that morning, inside a room lit by a single lamp, was the only reason she found it. When she reached the door, she stopped. "What about the file?" she asked. Raphael looked at the phone lying in the middle of the table. "Leave it there," he said. I still want to hear it one more time." "Don't," she said. He didn't answer, and she walked out. On the first day, he didn't go to the diner. He didn't send a message. He didn't call. He didn't know who might be watching. And until he did, every door he had ever walked through was a door he might lead someone else to. On the second day, he had dinner with Sloane Ashford at her home, in the small dining room at the back, just the 2 of them, with real candles because she hated electric ones. He asked whether she had slept well. She said she hadn't. He told her he would have someone bring her a different pillow. On the 3rd day, he took her to the doctor. He sat in the waiting room for 25 minutes and read about yachts from beginning to end, and when she came out, he stood before she had the chance to call his name. On the fourth day, she was tired, and they didn't see each other. On the fifth day, he brought her a box of almond cookies from the shop in the North End that she liked, and she ate 3 and said she was going to get fat, and he told her it didn't matter. On the 6th day, she sat beside him on the sofa, took his right hand, and placed it against her stomach. He left his hand there. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," she said. "I want to ask you something, and I don't want you to say yes just because I'm pregnant." "Go ahead, Emiliano," she said. He didn't pull his hand away. "I know it was your father's name," she said. "I know you don't talk about him. I know no one in that entire building dares say his name in front of you. But I've been thinking about it for 3 months, and I can't think of any other name. You built all of this from what he left behind. Our little boy will grow up inside it. I think he should know where he came from." She looked at him. He looked at his hand resting against the silk. "I don't want to presume," she said. "You can say no." Outside the window, the streetlights of Beacon Hill came one by one, about a second apart, just as they always did. "It's a beautiful name," he said. She smiled, wrapped both arms around his arm, and he didn't move. "Do you really mean that?" "It's an honor," he said, "for the boy." And for him, she rested her face against his shoulder. "I was afraid you'd be angry," she said. "I'm not angry," he said. They remained that way for about another minute. Then he said he needed to take a phone call. And she said of course, and he stood, walked down the hallway, and opened the glass door leading to the balcony. The 9th floor. October wind coming in from the harbor. He didn't take out his phone. He placed both hands on the iron railing, looked down at the street, and began to count. 1, 2, 3. He counted slowly and evenly, leaving exactly 1 breath between each number, and he thought of nothing else. By 74, his hands had stopped tightening around the iron bar. By 130, he could hear her moving around in the kitchen behind him. By 168, an ambulance passed beneath him, without sights or not, only its lights. 200. He removed his hands from the railing, adjusted his left cuff, then his right, and went back inside. The 8th day, Beatrix and Didier placed a single sheet of paper on Raphael's desk. Not a file, 1 sheet. There were 7 lines on it, and the 4th was a 19-minute call between Preston Hale's office number and Callaway Reese's cell phone at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, 3 months earlier. "Only 3 people in this company knew which day the trust amendment was put in front of you to sign," she said. "Him, me, and the person who printed it." Raphael looked at the name. Callaway Reese, 41 years old. Chief accountant, 11 years with the company. The man whose desk was so neat that not a single sheet of paper ever lay outside its tray. The man who brought pastry into the break room every Friday. The man who stood to shake hands whenever someone entered the room, even when that person was a janitor. "What was he promised?" Raphael asked. "The chief financial officer's chair," Beatrix said, "after the restructuring. After you're no longer sitting here." Raphael set the paper down face down. He sat motionless for about half a minute. Then he reached for the intercom button and told his secretary to prepare a company-wide internal announcement to be sent at 9 o'clock the next morning, and to ask Mr. Reese to come see him at 8:45. Beatrix stood in the middle of the room without moving. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to promote him," Raphael said. The next morning, Callaway Reese walked into the 9th floor office wearing the face of a man who hadn't slept. And 20 minutes later he walked out wearing the face of a man who had just been saved. Raphael had risen when he entered. Raphael had shaken his hand with both of his. Raphael had said the company was entering a complicated period, that he needed someone who understood numbers, seated higher up, that he had been thinking about this since spring, and had only been waiting for the right moment, and that the announcement would go out in 15 minutes. Callaway Reese said thank you 3 times. By the 3rd, his eyes had turned red. At 9 o'clock, the entire building received the email. Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately, with second-level signing authority over every approval stream connected to the family trust. At noon, there were pastries in the break room, and this time he hadn't brought them. Everyone else had brought them for him. Beatrix and Didier stood in the doorway of Raphael's office at 7 o'clock that evening, her arms folded across her chest. "Are you planning to tell me?" she said, "or am I supposed to work it out myself?" "You've already worked it out," Raphael said. She remained silent. 3 weeks from now, when everything breaks open, he said, he'll be sitting in a room with 2 federal agents, and he'll talk. He'll tell them everything, because he's the kind of man who tells them everything. The only question is what he'll be when he tells it. A chief accountant who was tricked into signing papers is a witness. A witness gets immunity, protection, and gets to go home. But a chief financial officer with second-level signing authority, publicly promoted in front of the entire company 3 weeks before the case explodes, a man who personally approved the transfer stream with his own signature. He didn't finish the sentence. He isn't a witness anymore, Beatrix said. He's a senior accomplice. 3 times the sentence, Raphael said. 3 weeks later, in a windowless room inside the federal building on Sudbury Street, Calloway Reese would sit before a metal table and speak for 4 hours, and at the 210th minute, when the interrogator read his title back into the record, Chief Financial Officer, effective October 11th, he would stop talking. He would sit motionless for about 10 seconds, then he would turn his head and look toward the black glass behind him, and he would know. On the other side of the glass, Rafael Castellano stood in the darkness, with his hands clasped behind his back. He said nothing. He only gave one small nod, then he turned away. In the corridor, Beatrix walked beside him, and she said what she had been holding back for 3 weeks. He has a family, I know, Raphael said. I've been paying the tuition for 4 years, and I'm not stopping. She stopped in the middle of the corridor. So did he. Did you hear me clearly, he said. I'm not stopping. I'm not reducing it. But there are no conditions. What happened today is between him and me. No one else in that house signed anything. No one else in that house was promised a chair. Don't you feel guilty? She asked. Raphael looked down the corridor toward the elevator doors. Yes, he said. That's how I know I'm not completely broken yet. He pressed the button. But guilt isn't a reason not to do something. It's the price. On the first night, Delphine Marchetti poured coffee for table 6 at 2:47 in the morning, and no one came. She left it there. At 3:07, she carried the cup into the kitchen and poured it down the sink. The second night was the same. The third night was the same. She didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell. A regular customer stopped coming, and that happened every week in an all-night diner on Congress Street. She had worked there for 3 years and had seen enough people disappear that she no longer asked about any of them. People moved away. People changed shifts. People got married or left their wives or simply found somewhere else closer to home. No one owed her an explanation. She poured the 4th cup on the 4th night. Meanwhile, her life moved according to a number of its own, and that number didn't care who came or who didn't. $44,000. That was the number now. 3 years earlier, it had been $41,000. $41,000 was what remained after her mother's insurance had paid its share and declared that everything else fell outside the coverage. Delphine paid $50 a month, not because $50 accomplished anything, because $50 was the amount the collection and company agreed to accept without filing in court. And once they filed, they would garnish her wages directly, and once they garnished her wages, she wouldn't be able to pay the rent on the room above the laundromat, and once she couldn't pay the rent, everything else would fall with it. 3 years. $1,800 paid. The debt had grown by $3,000. It was the only kind of mathematics poor people were taught for free, and no one had to go to school to learn it. On the 9th night, Nadia Kowalski came in early to retrieve the coat she had forgotten and saw a full cup of coffee sitting on table 6 with no one in the seat. She said nothing. On the 13th night, she saw it again. On the 17th night, she stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Delphine carry the cup inside and pour it down the sink, and she couldn't hold back any longer. Why do you keep pouring it? Delphine rinsed the cup beneath the faucet. She didn't turn around. He hasn't come in for 2 weeks, Nadia said. You know that. You still pour it, yes. Then why? Delphine placed the cup on the rack. She wiped her hands on her apron. Because if he comes and it isn't ready, she said, the coffee will take 4 minutes. He doesn't have 4 minutes. She said it plainly, in the voice of someone talking about setting out silverware or wiping down a table, and then she went out to take the order of the old man sitting at the counter. Nadia remained in the kitchen for a long time. Delphine didn't realize what she had just said. She didn't think about it. She didn't have time to think about it, because she still had 4 hours left in her shift that night, and the next morning she had to call the collection company and ask why the figure on that month's statement had jumped by another $40, and they would tell her it was a processing fee, and she would say thank you and hang up, because arguing with them would cost another 30 minutes, and 30 minutes of her time was worth more than $40. On the 18th night, she poured it. On the 19th night, she poured it. She set the cup down on the right edge of the table, where it had always been, and sat in the seat across from it for 20 minutes, her hands resting in her lap as she looked through the window at the empty stretch of Congress Street beyond it. There was no one there. At 3:07, she stood, carried the cup into the kitchen, and poured it away. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, June of the previous year, and the sunlight came straight through the front window of Ollie's, cutting a long golden drip across the vinyl floor from the door all the way to the counter. The diner was empty. The afternoon shift was always empty, which was why Nadia Kowalski had chosen this hour, and hanging on the door was a piece of cardboard handwritten in red marker that said, "Today we're celebrating Teddy's birthday. Come in, there's cake." 7 people. Nadia, Delphine, old Mr. Ollie, 2 elderly women who had been morning regulars since before any of the others were born, a dishwasher named Manny, and a man in a charcoal gray suit sitting on an orange plastic chair at table 2. The cake leaned to one side. It leaned because Nadia had made it herself at 2 o'clock in the morning after finishing her shift, and the frosting was thicker on one side than the other, and no one said anything about it, and 8-year-old Theodora Kowalski thought it was the most beautiful cake she had ever seen in her life. Her laughter struck the tiled walls and came back, and in an empty diner, a child's laughter sounded twice as loud. That morning, on the 9th floor of a glass building across the city, Beatrix and D.A. had watched Rafael Castellano tell her to move the 4 o'clock meeting. She asked when he wanted it moved to. He said Thursday. She told him Thursday was when 2 bankers were flying in from Zurich, that they had booked their tickets the month before, and that moving the meeting would be understood as a message. He said good. She looked at him for another 2 seconds, then opened his calendar and typed 3 words into the 4 o'clock slot: personal matter, 90 minutes. And she sat staring at those 3 words on the screen longer than necessary, because in 3 years of working for this man, she had never typed them once. Now he sat on the orange plastic chair, his knees touching the edge of table 2. Exactly 1.5 centimeters of white cuff still showing beneath his sleeves, and he sang along with the other 6 people. He sang very softly and out of tune, and no one noticed because everyone was out of tune. Teddy blew out the candles. Nadia cut the cake. On top of it was a flower made of frosting, only one, purple and misshapen, placed exactly where the frosting was thickest. Delphine handed plates to everyone. When it was the turn of the man at table 2, Teddy climbed down from her chair, walked around the table, took the plate from Delphine's hands, and placed it in front of him with both of hers. On the plate was the slice with the flour. "You have to eat the piece with the flour," the little girl said. "That's the best piece. I saved it for you." Rafael Castellano looked at the plate. "When did you decide to save it?" he asked. "When my mom made the cake," Teddy said. "I told her not to cut through that part." She returned to her seat, began eating her own piece, and immediately started talking about something else. The neighbor's cat, and she didn't look at him again, because to an 8-year-old child the matter was finished. It had been done. There was nothing more to think about. He sat motionless. He picked up the plastic fork and ate the piece of cake with the flour, and it was far too sweet, and the frosting clung to the roof of his mouth, and as he chewed, he tried to remember the last time anyone in the world had saved something for him. Not given, not handed over, saved. It meant there had been a stretch of time beforehand when someone had thought of him while he wasn't there, had kept something aside with their own hands, and had made sure no one else took it. He finished chewing the entire piece of cake, and he still couldn't remember. No one in this room knew who he was. There wasn't a photograph of Rafael Castellano in any newspaper in the state of Massachusetts, and that wasn't luck. That was the result of all Beatrix and Daye's work, and she was very good at it. All of Boston knew the name, no one knew the face. The 7 people inside this diner saw a quiet man who came in at 2 o'clock in the morning and ate eggs, and that was all they saw, and that was precisely why the piece of cake was real. Delphine walked past with the coffee pot and stopped on his right. "Table 6, she said. "You've got frosting right here." She pointed to the corner of her own mouth. He wiped it away. She kept walking. On the 12th day, at 3 o'clock in the morning, Rafael Castellano drove out of the underground parking garage and told himself he was only taking a short detour to clear his head. He circled through the seaport. He circled along Summer Street. Then he turned onto Congress Street and saw the pale yellow neon sign with half the letter I missing, and he parked and sat motionless for 10 seconds and went inside. He was carrying the file. He hadn't intended to bring it in. It had been lying on the passenger seat because he had spent 4 hours reading it at the office and couldn't read another word. And when he opened the car door, his hand picked it up. And so it came inside with him. The diner was empty. Delphine Marchetti was at the far end of the room, wiping down table 11 with a blue cloth. And when the door opened, she looked up. She said nothing. She watched him for about a second and a half. Then she lowered her head, finished wiping the table, and said in her usual voice, "Fried eggs?" "Yes," he said. With grilled tomatoes." With grilled tomatoes, he sat down at table 6. Placed the file on the tabletop, opened it, and stared at the same lines he had been staring at for 4 hours, and they still told him nothing. 4 law firms had reviewed the contract. 4, one in Boston, one in New York, one in Washington, and one in London that Beatrix had hired solely because she wanted someone who didn't know who was paying them. All of them had returned the same answer in 4 slightly different forms of legal language: that the document was entirely valid, that it contained no unusual provisions, and that the client had signed it voluntarily and with full legal capacity. Every one of them had read the contents. That was where they had gone wrong, and none of them knew it. Delphine brought out the coffee. She circled around the right side of the table, set the tray on the right edge, and as she poured, her eyes passed over the open pages in front of him, the way someone might glance at a stranger's newspaper on the subway, without intention and without interest. Then she stopped pouring. "This was printed on 2 different machines," she said. Raphael looked up. He looked at her, then down at the pages. For those 3 seconds, there was nothing in his mind at all. "What did you say?" "2 machines," she said. She set down the coffee pot, leaned closer, and touched the left edge of one page with her finger. "Page 6. The left margin is off. About 2 millimeters. He looked. He couldn't see it. "Here," she said, and she turned the page upside down, laid it over the previous sheet, and held both pages up at eye level. She brought them close to her face, closer than necessary, and narrowed her eyes lightly. "Look at the first line. On this page. Then this was He stood, walked around the table, and stopped beside her, following the direction of her finger. And he saw it. 2 millimeters. The entire file was 211 pages long, printed in the same font, on the same paper, with the same ink, and only one page began 2 millimeters farther to the left than all the others. "How did you know?" he asked. Delphine lowered the 2 sheets, returned them carefully to their proper places in the file, and smoothed them flat. "I've spent 3 years looking at hospital bills," she said. "I sit with them every night. I have to compare every page with the one from the month before, because they change the numbers without telling me. When you look at enough of them, you stop reading the words. You only see the shape. And the shape of this page is different." She picked up the coffee pot. "People don't reprint one page unless they've changed it," she said. "That takes effort. No one makes that kind of effort for something that doesn't matter." Then she went into the kitchen to get his eggs. Raphael Castellano stood alone beside table 6, looking down at the 6th page of a contract he had signed with his own hand 4 months earlier without turning past the 2nd page. He didn't read it. He didn't need to. He only looked at the left margin, those 2 millimeters, and something inside his chest began to race. He took out his phone and called Beatrix Ndiaye at 3:22 in the morning, and when she answered, he didn't say hello. Page 6. He said, "On the 19th day." At 2:35 in the morning, Raphael Castellano told Gus to take him to Congress Street. He hadn't gone there in 7 days. Before that, he hadn't gone either. He had been there exactly once in 19 days, on the night of the 12th day, and he had told himself that night was an exception, an accident, the result of a tired man picking up the wrong file when he got into the car. Now he sat in the back seat and said the name of the street aloud, and Gus looked at him in the rearview mirror for 1 second, said nothing, and turned. It was the only weakness Raphael Castellano had revealed in 19 days. One weakness. And the other side had waited exactly 19 days to take it. The car descended into the Ted Williams Tunnel at 2:41. Yellow lights passed over the roof in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. There were no other cars. At nearly 3 o'clock in the morning, this tunnel was a concrete tube 1.5 miles long beneath the bottom of the harbor, and in the middle of it there was no cell phone signal. Raphael was looking out the window. Gus saw it first. He didn't say anything. Raphael only knew something was wrong when Gus placed both hands on the steering wheel, because in 37 years, August and Rourke had never driven with both hands. The first SUV moved out of the left lane and drifted alongside the rear door. It didn't pass. It only stayed there, less than 3 feet away, matching their speed exactly, its windows black. Raphael turned his head toward it. Then, in the rearview mirror, the second one appeared behind them with its lights off, and it began to close the distance. Gus, I see them. The first SUV turned to the right. It didn't ram them, it pressed. It slowly and deliberately forced their car toward the concrete wall on the right side of the tunnel, and behind them, the second SUV had reached their bumper and begun to push. Their speed climbed. 70, 75. The distance between the right side of the car and the concrete wall kept shrinking, and Raphael watched it shrink and calculated they had about 3 seconds left. Gus didn't brake. That was what anyone else in the world would have done, and that was why anyone else in the world would have died inside that tunnel. He stepped on the gas. The car leaped forward and forced itself into the remaining gap between the front of the first SUV and the wall, a space of 16 inches wide, and then the sound of metal began. It didn't sound like a collision. It was a long, continuous screech, high and dry, the sound of steel grinding against concrete at 90 miles an hour. And it lasted for 200 feet. Sparks flew across the right side window. The right side mirror disappeared. The right rear window shattered and sprayed into the car in a rain of tiny milky white fragments, and Raphael Castellano didn't duck. He turned around. He braced one hand against the back of the seat and twisted his entire body toward the rear, his face less than a foot from the broken window, and he watched the second SUV fall behind, and he read the license plate. He read it aloud. He shouted it. He tore the radio from the dashboard and screamed into it, shouting the number 3 times in succession, his voice breaking on the second. Both hands clenched around the device so tightly that his knuckles turned white. And for those hackers, these fairy wars wasn't the face of Raphael Castellano. There was no signal. They were beneath the bottom of the harbor. Not one word of the 3 times he shouted reached anyone. The car broke away from the tunnel wall, and Gus held it straight, and the 2 SUVs slowed down, and then they took the first exit out of the tunnel, both of them without haste, like 2 worshippers leaving church after the service. No one followed them. No one fired a shot. Nothing happened. The car traveled the final half-mile in silence, wind pouring through the broken window, and when they emerged above ground, the eastern sky had begun to turn gray. Gus parked on Congress Street about 130 feet from Ollie's, in the darkness between 2 streetlights. He shut off the engine. He didn't turn around. Both of his hands remained on the steering wheel, and they were trembling, truly trembling, hard enough that Raphael could see the steel wedding band on his ring finger, tapping softly against the leather covering. "I've driven for your family for 37 years, Gus said. His voice was ordinary. "Your father." "Then you steered straight ahead." That was the first time. Raphael didn't answer. He was looking through the window toward the pale yellow neon sign, about 130 feet away. 2:47 in the morning. Inside, beneath the fluorescent lights, Delphine Marchetti was wiping down the counter with a blue cloth, moving from one end to the other, bending to reach the difficult places. And on table 6 sat a full cup of coffee she had just poured, steam rising from it, with no one in the seat. She knew nothing. She didn't know 2 vehicles had just emerged from a tunnel a mile and a half away. She didn't know why. She didn't know who. She was only wiping the counter because that was what needed to be done at 2:47. And in a little while she would sit in the chair across from that cup of coffee for 20 minutes, and then she would pour it away. Raphael Castellano watched her through the glass for about 15 seconds. Then he said, "Go." Gus started the engine, and as the car pulled away from Congress Street with 1 broken window and a bare streak of missing paint stretching 200 feet along its side, Raphael Castellano understood what he should have understood from the very first night. For 7 months, every night, he had driven to the same place at the same hour, and every night he had led them straight to the one door he wanted to keep safe. On the 22nd day, at 8:15 in the morning, Beatrix Ndiaye walked into the 9th floor office carrying a thin file, and she didn't knock. 9 days. That was how long it had been since the night he called her at 3:22 in the morning and said only 2 words, page 6. 9 days tracing records across 7 states. 9 days turning through 3,200 public registrations. 4 shell companies in Nevada led nowhere. 2 in Wyoming did the same. And one name in South Dakota cost her a full 30 hours before proving to be nothing more than a duplicate name. Then, on the 9th day, close to midnight, she entered a string of characters into the state of Delaware's corporate information portal, a website anyone on the planet could access for free, with no login and no reason required, and she found it in 40 seconds. She placed the file on the desk in front of Raphael, and she didn't sit down. It was established on June 20th, she said, 3 weeks before your original wedding date in July, in Wilmington, Delaware. Publicly registered. Anyone can read it. I can read it. You can read it. A high school student with Wi-Fi can read it. Raphael opened the file. The first page was a trust registration, a standard form stamped by the state, and on the line bearing the trust names was a word he had to read twice before it reached him. Emiliano. The trust had been named for the child whose name, 16 days earlier, in a room lit by real candles, a woman had asked his permission to take from his father, and he had told her it was an honor, and she had rested her face against his shoulder. June 20th, she had asked him on the 6th day of October. The trust had existed for 3.5 months before she ever asked. I didn't sign this, Raphael said. No, Beatrix said. You didn't. That's the clever part. She turned to the second page of the original contract, the one he had signed, the one 4 law firms had read and declared entirely valid, then continued to page 6, the page whose left margin was off by 2 millimeters, and placed her finger on the 11th line from the bottom. 1 line. 27 words. The trustee retained the authority to designate a successor trust in any jurisdiction. You didn't need to sign the Delaware Trust, she said, because you had already signed away the authority to create it. With your own hand.
4 months ago.
On page 6, Raphael remained still. He stared at that line for a long time. 4 law firms read this document, he said. Yes, and no one saw it. They saw it, Beatrix said. They read it, and they wrote in their reports that it was a standard provision. Because it is a standard provision. It appears in 80% of the family trust agreements in this state. It's harmless. It remains harmless until someone has already created the trust it will designate. 3 weeks before you sign, in a state 400 miles away, Raphael stood. He walked up to the window and remained there with his back to her. Do you know why I told you to search the public record? He said. Because I kept thinking about one thing. If I were him, where would I hide it? If it were in a safe, I could open it. If it were out at sea, I could buy the right person. If it were on some island, I could fly there. He knows all of that. He sat 18 meters from this office for 11 years, and he knows exactly what I can do and what I can't. He turned around. He didn't hide it. He placed it in the brightest part of the room, somewhere anyone could see it, and because of that, no one looked. That's the only kind of hiding that works on a man like me. Beatrix said nothing. She was turning to the final page of the Delaware file, and Raphael didn't know when her expression had changed. There's one more thing, she said. He returned to the desk. I read the Emiliano Trust 4 times last night, she said. I was looking for the transfer provision. I kept waiting to see the word death. I waited through all 4 readings. It isn't there. She pushed the page toward him and placed her finger on a line in the middle. There isn't a single word about your death, she said. Preston Hale didn't write one word about you dying. Raphael leaned down and looked. The provision transferred complete control to the guardian of the assets, effective if the settler became legally incapacitated or unable to perform his obligations. He read it once. Then he read it again. Legally incapacitated. He sat with those 4 words all day. Beatrix left the room at 9 o'clock. He didn't call anyone in. He didn't eat. 3 times that day someone knocked on the door, and 3 times he didn't answer. And by 7 o'clock that evening, his secretary had canceled everything remaining on his schedule for the rest of the week without asking. He sat at the desk with a single page in front of him and read the same line again and again, while something inside his mind kept trying to fit itself together and couldn't. Loss of legal capacity, not death. Preston Hale had sat 18 meters from this room for 11 years. Preston Hale knew what Raphael Castellano ate, how many hours he slept, how quickly he signed. And Preston Hale was the kind of man who wrote 30 drafts of a single sentence. Had he wanted Raphael dead, he would have written the word death. Death was easier to prove, cleaner, impossible to dispute. He hadn't written death. At 11 o'clock that night, Raphael called Beatrix. Where are you? At the office. Come downstairs. Bring your laptop. The car was traveling along Starrow Drive at 11:20, with Gus behind the wheel. The right window replaced the day before and the long streak of missing paint along the side repaired, and not one of the 3 people inside mentioned it even once. Beatrix sat in the left rear seat with the laptop open on her knees, its screen casting a blue light across her face. "Pull up the tunnel footage," Raphael said. "I already did," she said. Day 19. 2 SUVs. Both plates were fake, mounted backward 3 hours earlier in a parking lot in Everett. I have footage from the lot. The person who attached them wore a hat and never raised his face once during the entire 4 minutes. Dead end. "I'm waiting for the insurance company. I didn't ask about the plates." She stopped. "Pull up the footage of my car," he said. "Can the tunnel camera see inside the vehicle?" "No. But camera 41 caught the interior through the windshield. From the front. About 9 seconds. Play it. What are you looking for?" Raphael stared through the window as the streetlights passed rhythmically over his face. "My face," he said. Beatrix looked at him for about 2 seconds. Then she typed and turned the laptop toward him. A small 13-inch screen inside a moving car near midnight, and on it were 9 seconds of black and white footage captured from the ceiling of the Ted Williams tunnel. The car shot into the frame. On its right was the concrete wall, and between the two ran a long white ribbon of light, sparks. The windshield flared bright, and inside, behind the glass, was a man. He wasn't sitting. He was twisting around toward the rear, one hand braced against the backs of the seat, the other clenched around a black object. His face was turned 3/4 toward the camera. His mouth was wide open. It opened impossibly wide and stayed that way for nearly 2 seconds, the muscles along both sides of his jaw pulling downward until his entire face was distorted, his eyes showing white. He was screaming. There was no sound. The footage had no audio. There was only a man inside a car, scraping along a concrete wall at 3 o'clock in the morning, not ducking, not taking cover, twisting toward the rear and roaring into a black device in his hand with the face of an animal. 9 seconds. Then the screen went black. Beatrix said nothing. No one in the car said anything. Rafael Castellano stared at that black screen, and within about 5 seconds, the thing that had been trying to fit itself together inside his mind for the past 12 hours finally locked into place. "Pull over," he said. Gus pulled over. They were on Congress Street, about 200 meters from Ollie's, and the pale yellow neon sign glowed ahead of them in the darkness. Raphael opened the door and stepped out. He didn't go anywhere. He stood in the middle of the street with his arms hanging at his sides, and he remained there for a very long time. 3 o'clock in the morning, not a single car in sight, the harbor wind running down the street and carrying a sandwich wrapper past his feet. Beatrix got out and stood beside the door. She didn't come closer. At last he spoke, and he spoke to the street, not to her. "No one was trying to kill me." She remained silent. "Think about it," he said. 2 vehicles. Professionals. They waited 19 days for exactly one night. They pressed me against the wall for 60 meters at 90 miles an hour. Then both of them took the first exit and went home. He turned to look at her. "Had they wanted me dead, I would have been dead at the 10th meter. They wouldn't have needed the other 50. He pointed toward the laptop in her hands. "That," he said. "That's what they came for. Not my life." Those 9 seconds, Beatrix lowered the laptop. Her face had changed. "Loss of legal capacity," Raphael said. 4 words, not death. "Preston doesn't need me dead, because if I die, there's an autopsy, an investigation. Police, insurance, and companies, 100 people asking questions. He needs me alive. He needs me sitting in a room while 3 doctors look at me and sign a piece of paper," he continued, his voice still perfectly ordinary, and that was the worst part. "You don't build a psychiatric case with 1 incident. You build it with a stack. A meeting I cancel without explanation. An employee I promote under unusual circumstances in front of the entire company. A calendar with the 3 words 'personal matter' written in the 4 o'clock slot for the first time in 3 years. A 54-year-old man who suddenly starts driving alone to a harbor diner at 2 o'clock in the morning, night after night, with no one knowing why." He turned his head toward the neon sign, and at the top of that stack, he said, are 9 seconds of me screaming into a radio with no signal, inside a tunnel beneath the harbor, wearing that face the wind blew. "They didn't need to fabricate anything," Raphael said. "They only needed to put me in the right place. Then I did the rest myself." He fell silent for a moment. "I performed for them for free," he said. For 19 straight days, he told Beatrix to go home. He told Gus to go home. Both of them looked at him, and neither argued, and the car left Congress Street at 3:15 in the morning, leaving a man in a charcoal gray suit standing alone beneath a street lamp. He walked 200 meters. He pushed open the door of Ollie's, and the bell above it rang, and Delphine Marchetti was standing at the counter counting loose change in the tray, and she looked up. She said nothing for about 2 seconds. Then she pushed the tray aside. "Sit down," she said. He sat at table 6. She circled around the right side, set the tray on the right edge of the table, turned a cup upright, and poured, and steam rose between them. "You aren't eating," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, it's 3:10 in the morning, and you aren't eating." She set the coffee pot on the table instead of carrying it away, pulled out the chair across from him, and sat down, and in 7 months, she had never once sat at his table. The diner was empty. There was only the sound of the refrigerator. "How long have you worked the night shift?" he asked. 3 years, without stopping. "Yes, not one morning shift. In 3 years? No. Why?" Delphine Marchetti looked at the cup in front of him. Outside, a garbage truck passed very slowly, and its flashing yellow lights swept across the front window and moved along the wall. She turned her head slightly away from them. "Because everything is dim at night," she said. He didn't understand. "No one can tell that I'm dim," she said. Then she continued in her ordinary voice, the voice of someone explaining how to adjust the coffee machine. "My left eye. The doctor calls it proliferative diabetic retinopathy. I've had diabetes since I was 12, the kind that needs injections, not the kind people usually talk about on television. 3 years ago, my left eye started failing. It isn't completely blind. It just lost the left side. I can still see in the center and to the right, but there's nothing in the outer left side. And there are black spots drifting back and forth, like there's a fly trapped inside my eye that I can't chase away." She gave a very small shrug. "During the day, there's sunlight. The sunlight makes everything flare white, and I can't see anything for about 3 seconds. 3 seconds is enough time to spill a tray of food on a customer. I did it twice during my first week. At night, there's no sunlight. At night, there are only fluorescent lights, and fluorescent lights are even, and if the light is even, I can work." She pointed behind her toward the counter without looking. 22 steps from the kitchen door to the counter. 14 steps from the counter to this table. The third stool at the counter sticks out a little. Everyone kicks it. I don't. I've counted everything. 3 years is enough time to finish counting. Rafael Castellano sat motionless. For about 5 seconds, there was nothing in his mind at all. Then something began to run backward. 7 months. More than 200 nights. A woman circling around the right side of this table. Every night. Not once from the left. Setting the tray on the right edge of the table. Every night. Lifting the check close to her face to read the amount. Every night. Standing on his right when she poured. Every night. He had seen all of it, night after night, more than 200 times, and he had thought it was habit. He was the man all of Boston hired to see what other people missed. He had found a page shifted by 2 millimeters inside a document 211 pages long. He had sat at the table for 7 months and he hadn't seen. "How much?" he asked. "How much what?" "The surgery." She gave a brief laugh that held no amusement. "You ask that like you're planning to pay for it. How much?" $11,000, she said. "Not including the medication afterward. The diner's insurance doesn't cover it. They call it elective. Meaning if you aren't dying right away, it isn't an emergency. How much do you have?" $2,300, she said. 3 years, she said the number as plainly as she might have said the time. "I save $50 a month. Some months 70. Some months nothing at all. Had I not been paying the collection company, I would have had enough last year. But I have to pay them, because otherwise they garnish my wages. And if they garnish my wages, I lose my room. And if I lose my room, I lose everything else." She was silent for a moment. "The doctor said that if I don't have the surgery, the right eye will follow. Within about 18 to 24 months. He told me that in March, she looked at the coffee pot on the table. March of last year, she said. Then she picked up the pot and poured more coffee into his cup even though he hadn't taken a single sip. He watched her do it. Her hands were perfectly steady. "Are you afraid?" he asked. Delphine Marchetti set the pot down. She looked directly at him, and it was the first time in 7 months that she had held his gaze for so long. "You're asking what I'm afraid of," she said. "It isn't going blind. I've already worked that out. If I go blind, I can still count my steps. People live that way." "A lot of people do," she paused. It's the day I can't see my younger brother's face anymore, and he still hasn't come back. She stood, picked up the coffee pot, and walked toward the counter. She took 14 steps. Rafael Castellano remained alone at table 6 with 2 cups of coffee, one of which he hadn't touched, and he watched her move through the fluorescent light without brushing her hand against a single chair. And he understood that for 7 months, this woman had crossed that room as though moving through a problem she had solved long ago. And no one in that diner, not even him, not even once, had ever realized that she was solving it. He didn't get up and leave. He sat there with the 2 cups of coffee, and when she had finished at the counter and begun arranging the tray of loose change again, he called across the empty room. "You studied accounting." She didn't look up. "How do you know?" 2 millimeters, he said. She finished counting the money, closed the tray, and came back. She didn't sit down this time. She stood on the right side of the table with one hand resting on the back of the chair. 3.5 years, she said. Suffolk University. I had 1 semester left, then your mother got sick. Yes, she said. That's what I tell people. He looked up at her. That's what I tell everyone, she said. Nadia, Mr. Ollie, my doctor, my brother. Whenever anyone asks, I tell them my mother got sick, so I left school. It sounds decent. It makes me sound like a devoted daughter. And people nod and leave it alone. They don't ask anything else. If I told them the other part, they would ask more questions, and I don't like answering them. What's the other part? Delphine pulled out the chair and sat down. I was an intern at an accounting firm on Federal Street, she said. My final semester. My job was entering numbers. There was one client, a nursing home chain with 8 facilities. I worked through their books for 3 weeks, and I found a medical supply expense repeated at 4 facilities, on the same date, for the same amount, but under different vendors. I checked those 4 vendors. 3 of them had the same post box address in Quincy. She continued in the same ordinary voice. I reported it to my manager. He told me he would look into it. 2 weeks passed and then nothing happened. I reported it to someone above him. Then I wrote an email to the compliance department, with attachments, page numbers, everything. Then what happened? Then they dealt with it, she said. They really did. That nursing home chain replaced its executive board 6 months later. People lost their jobs. I don't know the details because by then I wasn't there anymore. They fired you? No, she said. That's the clever part. They didn't fire me. My internship ended on the exact date it was supposed to end. They gave me a certificate, signed and stamped, with a sentence wishing me good luck. They didn't sue me. They didn't threaten me. Not one person raised their voice at me even once. She used 2 fingers to smooth a crease in the paper placemat. There's an internal record in that industry. It isn't a blacklist, so don't imagine anything that dramatic. It's only a file the larger firms share with one another, with notes about people who have worked for them. They put all kinds of things in it. Late to work. Not a good cultural fit. She paused. Beside my name were 4 words. Lacks professional judgment. Raphael said nothing. 4 words, she said. Not one of them was technically false. Not one said I had stolen anything. Not one said I had done something wrong. Those 4 words weren't illegal, and no one could sue over them. The first lawyer I asked told me that to bring a case, I would have to prove they were false and malicious, and that would cost about $60,000 in 3 years. I had $400. I thanked him and went home. She looked through the window. I submitted 41 applications, she said. 41. I remember the number because I wrote every one of them in a notebook, the date I applied, the company's name, the name of the person who received it. 3 places invited me to interview. All 3 said the interview had gone very well. All 3 said they would contact me again within the week. She gave a small shrug. 41 silences. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in September, a firm in Chicago called. They didn't use that file, I suppose, or they used it and didn't care. $68,000 a year. I was supposed to start 3 weeks later. The woman who called me was named Beth. She was so happy. She told me I sounded exactly like the person they needed. She stopped there. 3 weeks later was my mother's 4th round of chemotherapy, she said. Outside, the eastern sky was beginning to turn the color of lead. I called Beth back the next day and told her thank you, but I couldn't go. She asked whether it was because of the salary. She said there might be room to discuss it, so I told her it wasn't the salary. She said she understood. She had a mother, too. Delphine picked up his cold cup of coffee, turned it once against the tabletop, and set it down again. My mother died 4 months later, she said. I worked the night shift to pay for her room. The room where she lay. $320 a night, shared with another patient, with a curtain between them. She said it without placing emphasis on any part of the sentence. He couldn't think of anything to say. People say that if you do the right thing, heaven won't abandon you, she said. Have you heard that one? My grandmother used to say it. There's something similar written on the wall in my doctor's office. She stood and picked up both cups. I did the right thing 4 times, she said. I reported what I saw. I stayed with my mother. I signed what I had to sign. I paid what I owed 4 times. And all 4 times I did the right thing. She stood there holding the 2 cups. I lost my career. I lost my mother. I lost my brother. And I lost my sight. Raphael looked at her. Do you know why I still do the right thing, she said. Because I'm out of choices. It's the only thing I have left. She carried the 2 cups into the kitchen and turned on the faucet. Beatrix and DIA entered the office at 7 o'clock the next morning, and she wasn't carrying a file. She was carrying a single sheet of paper. She placed it on the desk and stepped back, and Raphael Castellano noticed that she stepped back, and in 3 years she had never done that before. Anyone who waited 19 days, she said, had to know where you had been going during the 19 days before that. I started over from the beginning. I didn't investigate the system. I investigated the people. He picked up the sheet, a bank statement. 1 line had been marked, $180,000, transferred into an account at a savings bank in Dorchester 6 months earlier, from a consulting company in Providence that had no employees and no website. The account holder's name was Augustin Rourke. Raphael read the name. Then he read it again. Then he placed the sheet back on the desk very gently and said, No, Beatrix said nothing. It's wrong, he said. Same name. Think about how many Irishmen named Rourke there are in this city. Run it again. I've run it 4 times, she said. Social security number, address, date of birth. March 11th, 1960. He rose from his chair. He walked to the window and stood there without speaking for about 15 seconds. He drove me to school, he said. 1st grade. He waited at the gate through the entire physical education class because I had asthma and my mother was afraid. He was in the morgue when my father died. I was 17 and I couldn't stand, and he held me. He held me with both hands right here, and he touched both sides of his shoulders for 30 minutes. And he didn't say a single word. Beatrix still said nothing. Do you know what he did in that tunnel the other night? Raphael said. He's 66 years old, and he accelerated into a 16-inch gap at 90 miles an hour. Had he braked, I would have died. Had he missed by 4 inches, we both would have died. I know, Beatrix said. Then explain it to me. I can't, she said. That's why I brought this sheet up here instead of handling it myself. Raphael took the keys to his own car, went down to the garage, and drove himself. Gus lived in Dorchester, in a 2-story wooden house painted pale blue on Adams Street, the same house he had lived in since 1991. There was a low fence. There was a rocking chair on the porch that no one had sat in since his wife died. Raphael knocked on the door at 8:20 in the morning, and Augustine Rourke opened it wearing a flannel shirt and holding a cup of tea. He looked at Raphael's face for about a second. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. Come in, he said. Raphael didn't need to ask anything. That was the first thing that struck him. There wasn't a single second in which Gus failed to understand what was happening. He set the cup of tea on the kitchen table, pulled out a chair, sat down, and placed both hands on the tabletop, and they began to tremble. Raphael looked at those hands. In 37 years they had never trembled. Even in the tunnel, they had only begun to shake after everything was over. 180,000, Raphael said. Yes, Gus said. You aren't going to ask what I'm talking about. No, Raphael stood in the middle of the kitchen. Tell me, Gus looked down at his hands. Do you remember 2009, kid? Don't change the subject. I'm not changing the subject, Gus said. He looked up. Your mother sold the bracelet that year. Raphael stood motionless. It wasn't enough, Gus said. She was short 180,000. There was a clock on the kitchen wall with a second hand, and they could hear it ticking. I borrowed it, Gus said. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't tell your mother. I didn't tell your father. And I sure as hell didn't tell you. I borrowed from the kind of people a 49-year-old driver could borrow from, and you know what kind of interest those people charge. He turned the cup of tea once. I paid it for 37 years, he said. No, sorry, 17. 17 years. 37 is how long I've driven for your family. I got them mixed up. He gave a very brief, soundless laugh. 17 years I paid that debt, kid. The salary you paid me was more than enough to live on. You paid me well. You paid me better than any man sitting behind a wheel in this state. But interest doesn't sit still. Every time I thought I was close to finishing, it stood back up. He looked through the kitchen window toward the loafs. 6 months ago, someone came to see me, he said. Not here, at the barber shop. A man sat in the chair beside mine, and he knew the number. The exact number, kid. Exact down to the last dollar, including the interest I had miscalculated myself. He told me they would erase it. Clean. Gone. In one day, he set the cup down. He said all I had to do was tell them where you ate. Raphael said nothing. You told them, he said. I told them, Gus said. He said it while looking directly into Raphael's eyes without blinking. I told them the name of the diner. I told them the street. I told them the time. 2:47 in the morning, nearly every night, the corner table. And the man sits there alone. Raphael Castellano stood in the kitchen of the man who had taught him to do tayeshoes and felt nothing, no anger, no pain, only a blank white space. Then the next morning, Gus said, I went to see Miss Ndie, and I confessed. Raphael looked up. Gus wasn't looking at him anymore. He was looking at the clock on the wall. I drove to the building at 6 o'clock in the morning and sat in the 9th floor hallway waiting for her. And when she arrived, I told her exactly what I just told you. Every word. I told her I had sold you out. I told her I was ready to go to prison. I told her she could call whoever she wanted. He stopped. She told me to sit down. Then she asked me one question. She asked whether they had told me to keep reporting. Raphael stood frozen. For 6 months, Gus said, once a week, I've called them and reported. I told them where you were, who you met, what time you left. And once a week, before I made the call, I went to the 9th floor, and Miss Ndie handed me a sheet of paper, and on that sheet was exactly what I was supposed to say. The kitchen door behind Raphael opened. Beatrix Ndie stood there. She had followed him from the building. She didn't apologize, and she didn't lower her eyes. I needed a channel, she said. For the past 6 months, everything Preston Hale has known about you has been something I wrote, including the fact that you went to that diner every night, which I left unchanged because I needed it to be real, because a channel is only useful when 9 parts of what it says are true. She looked directly at him. 19 days ago, I wrote the wrong sheet. I let them know you would return. That was my mistake, and I'll submit my resignation Monday morning. Raphael didn't hear the second half. He turned back toward Gus. Why didn't you tell me? He said. Gus looked up. His hands were still trembling on the table, and now Raphael understood that they weren't trembling from fear. Because you would forgiven me, kid, Gus said. You've always forgiven me. Your whole life you've forgiven me. Even when you were 7 and I lost the dog, you forgave me. Had I stood here and told you this, you would have hugged me. You would have said it was all right, Gus, and then I would have gone home still being the man who sold you out. Except now I would have owed you one more embrace. He lowered both hands into his lap. I didn't want to be forgiven, he said. I wanted to repay the debt. The second hand of the kitchen clock kept ticking. Raphael Castellano had spent 20 years trying to discover who would betray him. He had built an entire system around that question. He had hired people to answer it. And never once had he thought to ask the opposite question, who had already betrayed him, then spent the rest of his life standing outside his door with the car keys in his hand, waiting for the chance to redeem himself. 2 days later, Beatrix Ndie placed a photograph on the 9th floor desk. She hadn't submitted her resignation on Monday morning. Raphael hadn't mentioned it, neither had she, and they both understood that the silence was the answer. The photograph had been printed on an ordinary sheet of A4 paper, and one corner was slightly blurred because it had been taken through a telephoto lens from a considerable distance. The parking lot behind Ollie's. The yellow glow of a tall sodium lamp. A woman walking from the back door toward the bicycle rack, carrying a black garbage bag in one hand, her hair tied with an elastic band, her white sneakers yellowed with age. The time the photograph was imprinted in the lower right corner, 4:11 in the morning. Who gave you this? He asked. No one gave it to me, Beatrix said. I took it. Their people use a cheap cloud storage service, and I have someone inside. There are 46 photographs in all, starting on September 11th. I printed one for you. Raphael Castellano looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a very long time. In 20 years of sitting at the top of this city, There had been 3 occasions when someone placed something on his desk intending to frighten him. All 3 times, he had read it, folded it, and told someone to take it away. This time, something traveled slowly down his spine, and he realized he had never known what that feeling looked like from the inside. 46 photographs. It meant they had been standing in that parking lot since the beginning of September. It meant that through all those nights when he sat at table 6 eating eggs with grilled tomatoes, someone had been standing 40 meters away in the darkness, pressing a shutter. It meant that every night he drove out of that parking lot, went home, and slept, that woman remained there for another 3 hours, alone, carrying a garbage bag, in a parking lot without cameras. "What do you want me to do?" Beatrix asked. That was when he understood that everything he wanted to do would be wrong. He could place 2 men at the entrance to Congress Street. They would remain there for a week, and within a week, the other side would know, and the moment the other side learned that Rafael Castellano had removed 2 men from his own protection detail to guard the parking lot behind a diner, she would no longer be merely a waitress. She would become leverage. He could buy the building. He could install cameras. He could pay the local police to add another patrol. Every one of those actions would be an arrow pointing toward the door of Ollie's, and every arrowhead would stop in the same place. He sat down. He looked at the photograph for a while longer. Then he said, "Call Gus upstairs." Gus arrived 15 minutes later. He stood in the middle of the room holding his hat, and he didn't sit, though no one had told him to remain standing. "You called him on Thursday?" Raphael said. "Yes," Gus said. Raphael turned toward Beatrix. "What did you write for him this week?" She opened her notebook. "Your meeting schedule. Your flight to New York on Friday, which is true. And a line about you reviewing the real estate portfolio in South Boston, which is false, so they'll waste 2 weeks searching the wrong place." "Remove the last line," Raphael said. "Replace it with something else." He looked at Gus. "This is what you're going to tell them. You're going to say the diner is old news. You're going to say I stopped going 3 weeks ago, and you're going to say the reason is that I lost interest. You're going to use these exact words. He got bored. He got bored with the diner. He got bored with the waitress there, and he only went because it was the only place still open at 2 o'clock in the morning near the road home." Gus didn't move. "If they ask about her," Raphael said, "you say you don't remember her name. You say you never went inside. You say you waited in the car. You say you saw her once or twice, and you think he barely even looked at the girl. She was only a waitress. You know what he's like." Beatrix stopped writing. "Say it again," Raphael said. "To make certain." Then next week, mention it one more time casually, as though you're complaining about having to wait outside in the car. Then stop. Don't say it a 3rd time. 3 times would be bad. Gus tightened his hands around the hat. "Kid," he said. "Can you say it?" Raphael asked. The old man stood there for about 5 seconds. Then he gave one small nod. "I can say it," he said. He walked out. The door closed. Rafael Castellano sat alone at the desk with a photograph taken at 4:11 in the morning, and he understood perfectly well what he had just done. The only way to keep her safe was to prove that she had no value. To make 3 men somewhere in this city sit over a report, nod, and cross the diner off their list because what did one waitress matter? It was the most expensive lie Rafael Castellano had ever told in his life, and he had told many lies, and not one of the others had cost him a cent. He sat there a while longer. Then he reached out and pressed the button. "Trix," he said. "Yes, the party." She stopped in the doorway. "Her 30th birthday. Anchorage Hall. I'm paying for it, so I decide." He turned the photograph face down on the desk. "I want the guest list, all of it. And I want to choose who stands at every door." Anchorage Hall stood at the end of Pier 18, a 3-story block of glass raised on concrete pilings driven straight down into Boston Harbor. And that night it glowed like a lantern resting on the black surface of the sea. From inside, guests could see the entire skyline of the first city, the glass towers of the seaport, the red lights blinking atop the cranes, and farther away, fading into the distance, the cold ribbon of light from Logan Airport across the water. Anyone standing in that hall felt as though the city had arranged itself for their private viewing. That was why it was expensive. 200 guests, 3 state senators, 4 bankers, 2 of whom had just flown in from Zurich for the 2nd time in 3 weeks, 2 television hosts, the president of an arts foundation, and a rising young chef whom Sloan had personally invited by text message, chamber music, 4 musicians, a string quartet, every piece chosen by Rafael Castellano. white magnolias on every table because she hated roses. The wine was the same kind she had drunk in Provence since she was 26, and he had sent people searching for 3 months to purchase the entire remaining lot. Each embossed invitation bore one handwritten line, and Raphael had sat down over 4 evenings and written all 200 of them himself. Marguerite Ashford wore emerald green. She stood near the window, holding a glass of wine she didn't drink, 61 years old. Her back straight, her chin slightly raised. The light from the ceiling falling across her, in the way, fell across people who knew exactly where they belonged in a room. She greeted every person by name. She remembered the names of their wives, the names of their dogs, and the schools their children had recently entered. Looking at her standing there, no one would have imagined that 3 generations of her family had quietly gone bankrupt inside a Beacon Hill house she had somehow managed to preserve, along with the sound of her voice. Sloane stood in the middle of the room, one hand resting on her stomach in the natural way a woman 5 months pregnant often did, and people gathered around her. At 9:15, Raphael Castellano stepped onto the stage. He carried no notes. He spoke for 3 minutes. He spoke about a charity auction 5 years earlier, about a woman who had stood before his painting no one else noticed, and asked what he thought of it, and he said it was the first question anyone had asked him in 15 years. About what he thought of something that wasn't money. He spoke about how she slept on her left side because she was afraid of putting pressure on the baby. He spoke about how she hated roses, hated electric candles, and hated being photographed from the right. He said there were people who entered your life and made it wider, and until he met her, he hadn't known how narrow his own life had been. Every word he said was true. Not one word was invented. That was precisely what made it cruel. And not of the 200 people present understood that, and by the second minute, half the room had tears in their eyes. Marguerite Ashford raised one finger and lightly touched the corner of her right eye with the exact gesture she had practiced all her life. Sloane smiled, shook her head, and whispered to the person beside her that he was making far too much of it. Applause rose. He waited for it to fade. "I have the entire room," murmured. Someone whistled. "But I think," he said, "it should be open together." The ceiling lights dimmed. The string quartet stopped playing. The wall behind the stage, nearly 40 feet of black glass, lit up. There were no wedding photographs, no family video, nothing at all. Only a white background, and across that white background ran a black sound wave from left to right, rising and falling in a steady rhythm, exactly like the lines seen on a monitor beside a hospital bed. For 2 seconds, 200 people stood perfectly still because they thought it was some clever performance they hadn't yet understood. Then the speakers came alive, and the voice of Sloane Ashford, clear as crystal, poured through the hall from 24 speakers suspended around the ceiling. "By Monday morning, everything his father built will bear your family name." The champagne glass in her hand began to tilt. It tilted slowly, about 20 degrees, then 30, and the wine began spilling over the rim in a thin stream, running down the fold of silk at the hip of her dress and spreading into a dark stain, and it kept flowing without stopping. She didn't notice. Her fingers still held the stem of the glass. Through the 24 speakers, her voice continued. "So will the child." 37 seconds of Preston Hale's voice. No one in the hall moved during those 37 seconds. Then came the voice of Marguerite Ashford, slow and warm, the same voice that had just spoken the names of 4 bankers' dogs. "Men fear knives, my dear, but they die from gratitude." Then Preston's voice asked a question about the child, about what would happen when he grew older, and began asking questions. And then Sloane answered without hesitation, without thought, the way someone answered a question she had already answered many times in her own mind. "Then I'll tell him the truth, that his father was a decent man, a lawyer, and his mother had to cross one very ugly bridge to reach him, 200 people. Somewhere near the back, beside the kitchen door, a fork fell onto the stone floor. At 8:15 the following morning, Raphael Castellano walked into the Suffolk County District Attorney's office on Bullfinch Street without an appointment, wearing a different charcoal gray suit, and told the receptionist that he had come to report a violation of Section 99. Beatrix Nindier stood 2 steps behind him, and she had argued with him for the entire 20-minute drive, and she had lost. They made him wait for 40 minutes. Then they took him into a room with 3 people, and he sat down, placed the telephone on the table, and said that on the night of October 11th, at an address in Beacon Hill, he had recorded a private conversation among 3 people without the knowledge of any of them, that he had done so deliberately, that no one had encouraged him, and that he fully understood what he had done. The person seated in the middle of the table asked whether he had an attorney. He said he had 34 of them, and he wasn't using any. 4 months later, he received a fine, a suspended sentence, and a line in his Massachusetts criminal record that would remain there for the rest of his life. In the car on the way back, Beatrix stared through the window. "You just turned yourself in," she said. "You know that, don't you? If you had stayed silent, no one would have touched you. No one will ever hear that file again. It isn't part of any official record. Whatever 200 people in that lobby heard, they only heard it. You could live the rest of your life without anyone asking." "I know," Raphael said. "Then why?" He looked toward the harbor. "Because Calloway's is going to spend 11 years in prison," he said. She turned toward him. "I get 4 months and a fine," he said. "I need to know that number, Trix. I need to look at it." She didn't say another word for the rest of the drive. It was the first time in Rafael Castellanos' life that he had written himself a bill, and he hadn't written it to pay it. He had written it so he could read it. Everything else moved quickly. Preston Hale was indicted within 48 hours. Not because of the fund. Because of the 401 seconds he had been standing in the middle of Anchorage Hall's glass lobby, crushing a storage device beneath his heel in front of 4 legally marked security cameras and 7 telephones recording him. In the entire history of criminal law in that state, there had never been an easier crime to prove than the destruction of evidence recorded from 4 separate angles. The federal laboratory recovered 61% of the drive within 9 days, and 61% was more than enough. Calloway Reese spent 4 hours inside a windowless room on Sudbury Street and confessed to everything, and he did so while holding the title of Vice President of Finance, effective October 11th, and that title tripled his sentence. Marguerite Ashford held out for 11 days. On the 12th day, a retired notary in Newton submitted the originals of 4 consulting authorization documents bearing her signature, and she never entered Anchorage Hall again. Sloane Ashford wasn't prosecuted. Raphael didn't file a civil suit. He didn't need to. In that city, the courts weren't what destroyed people. 3 days after the party, no one in Boston answered the telephone anymore. They didn't hang up. They simply didn't call back. People said justice was slow. That was true. But among the upper class, rumors traveled faster than the police, and they didn't need a search warrant. At 6 o'clock on the 4th morning, the Boston Globe reached the newsstands. Front page. There was a photograph taken on someone's telephone inside the lobby, slightly blurred and tilted, and in it stood a man surrounded by 200 people, with a button torn from his collar, bending his head to say something very quietly to another man. Beneath the photograph was his name, Rafael Castellano, 34 years old. Beatrix and DIA had spent 3 years ensuring that no photograph of this man appeared in the University of Massachusetts. She had been very good at it. All of Boston knew the name. No one knew the face. At 7 o'clock that morning, the newspaper was placed on the counter at Ollie's on Congress Street, as it was every morning, by the same delivery man, in the same stack, in the same place beside the coffee machine. Delphine Marchetti's shift ended at 7 o'clock. She sat down on the 3rd stool at the counter, the crooked one everyone kept kicking, and pulled the newspaper toward her, because she always read it before going home. Those were the only 15 minutes of her day when she didn't have to stand. She read the headline, then she looked at the photograph. She lifted the newspaper closer to her face, closer than necessary, and stared at it for about 4 seconds. Then she placed it back on the counter, perfectly flat, and sat without moving. At 9 o'clock that morning, he pushed open the door. The bell rang. There were 6 people in the diner, the morning crowd, and Nadia was carrying plates, and Delphine was still sitting on the 3rd stool with the newspaper open in front of her. She stood. She went behind the counter, picked up the coffee pot, and walked toward him, and he sat down at table 6. She stood on the right side of the table. She didn't pour. She set the coffee pot down a little too hard, and the sound of glass striking the formica surface made 2 people at the counter turn around. 7 months, she said. He said nothing. I gave you free coffee 3 times, she said. 3 times, February, April, and May. I remember all three because each time I covered it with my own money, $4.50, and $4.50 is something I have to remember. I did it because you came in here with the face of a man who had just lost his job, and I thought you didn't have any money. Her voice wasn't loud. That was the worst part. I made you eat a grilled tomato. Do you remember? I stood there and argued with you over a tomato at 2 o'clock in the morning. I did it because I thought no one was cooking for you. I thought you lived alone somewhere, in one little room, eating food out of cans. She pulled the newspaper from beneath her arm and placed it on the table with the photograph facing up. I let you sit here until 4 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Ollie closes the kitchen at 3:30, and I still let you stay, and I wiped the counter more slowly so you wouldn't have to get up. How many times? I didn't count. I did it because I thought you had nowhere to go. I had nowhere to go, he said. She looked at him. You have 22 rooms, she said. He didn't answer. Right here, she said, tapping one finger against the newspaper. It says 22, in Weston. They printed the street name. They even printed how many acres you own. That's right, he said. You told me you had nowhere to go, she said. Her voice still wasn't loud. You have 22 rooms. That's right, he said. And that's why. The diner fell silent. Nadia had stopped carrying the food and now stood in the middle of the aisle with the tray in her hands. The two men at the counter had turned completely around. Delphine Marchetti stood beside table 6 and said nothing for about 5 seconds. Do you know what makes me angry? She said. It isn't the money. I don't care how much money you have. I serve insurance salesmen and men who sleep on the street, and I pour their coffee exactly the same way. She placed one finger on the tabletop. It's those 3 payments of $4.50, she said. It's $9 out of 7 months of my life. I save $50 a month, you already know that, and I gave you $9 because I thought you needed it more than I did. You let me do that. You sat there and let me give you something I couldn't afford to give. She stopped. That isn't accepting. That's taking. Rafael Castellano sat without moving. He could have said perhaps 40 different things at that moment, and all 40 of them would have been true, and not one of them was worth saying. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because here I'm table 6. He said. She didn't move. Everywhere else in this world I'm Castellano, he said. People look at me and start calculating. Within 3 seconds, they've decided how much I'm worth, what I can do for them, and how many steps away from me they should stand. I see it moving through their eyes, every time. For 20 years, he looked at the coffee pot on the table. Do you know how long 7 months is? He said. When it's the only time in 20 years that someone has scolded me for letting my coffee go cold. Delphine didn't answer immediately. She pulled out the chair across from him, sat down, and looked at him over the table. I've been reading this for 3 hours, she said, tapping the newspaper. There's a part that says you stood in front of 200 people and played that recording for them. There's a part that says the other man is going to prison. There's a part that says your company increased in value by 9% in 2 days. She looked at him. So you won? Yeah, he said. Then why do you look worse than you did the day before yesterday? He didn't answer. She straightened in her chair. I'm going to ask you one question, she said. Then I'm going home to sleep. I've worked 10 hours. She placed both hands on the table. Do you want to win, or do you want to live? He looked up. Because I've seen people choose the first one, she said. They won. Then they spent the rest of their lives sitting alone in large rooms. She stood, picked up the coffee pot, and walked into the kitchen. He didn't mention the necklace for 4 weeks. Then one morning, he instructed his attorney to send a letter. It wasn't a claim for marital property. The necklace was separate property, given before the marriage, and the marriage had never taken place. The letter was 3 lines long. Sloane Ashford returned it within 36 hours. No negotiation, no attorney. Not a single word enclosed with it. There was only a delivery box, and inside it was the velvet case. And inside the velvet case lay the necklace, resting exactly where it had always rested. Beatrix and DIA kept it. That was too fast, she said. A woman like her doesn't return anything within 36 hours. A woman like her holds it for 6 months so she has something to bargain with. I want it appraised before you touch it. You think she switched it. I think everyone switches things, she said. 3 days later, she placed a document on his desk bearing the letterhead of a gemological laboratory in New York. He read it. Then he read it again. Sloane Ashford hadn't switched it. She had returned the exact thing he had given her. The necklace was fake. Synthetic diamonds. A plated platinum setting, handmade, exceptionally high quality, with remarkably skilled craftsmanship, and that was the only part of the report that silenced Beatrix. Because on the final line there was a date. Estimated year of manufacture, 2009. Raphael sat without moving for about a minute. Then he took out his phone and called Gus. He spoke 3 sentences, then stopped. There was nothing on the other end of the line. It wasn't a lost connection. The old man was breathing. Raphael could hear him breathing, and he stood thudding for about 20 seconds, and those 20 seconds lasted longer than the entire 41 minutes in the dressing room. Gus, yeah, tell me. She sold the real one in 2009, kid, Gus said. Raphael stood. He didn't know why he stood. The year you were 17, Gus said. The year you spent for 4 months at Brigham. The year you thought the insurance had paid for your recovery. Raphael walked into the hallway. He passed through 2 doors. He reached the emergency stairwell, pushed open the door, and stood on the concrete landing with the phone pressed to his ear. The insurance covered 60%, Gus said. Your father was tied up in that harbor deal. Every dollar he had was buried in it, and he couldn't pull out a cent without letting people know he was weak. Your mother didn't tell him. She took the necklace by herself in a taxi one morning, and she came home that afternoon, and she didn't say a word to anyone throughout dinner. He stopped. It wasn't enough, kid. I already told you. They were still short $180,000. Raphael Castellano sat down on the concrete step. She made me swear, Gus said. That same day, in the kitchen, she held my hand and made me swear that as long as I was alive, the boy would never know. Then that autumn, she took me to Providence to a craftsman and commissioned the other one. She gave him a photograph. It took him 3 months to make it. Raphael couldn't speak. She did it, Gus said, so you would never know what you had cost her. The man who had destroyed 3 people with 35 seconds of sound inside a glass lobby overlooking Boston Harbor sat on a concrete step in the emergency stairwell on the 9th floor, and he couldn't stand up. Of all the things Sloane Ashford had taken from him, the necklace was the only thing she had returned untouched, and it was the only fake thing in the house. 20 minutes later, Gus came upstairs. He lowered himself onto the step beside Raphael, slowly, his knees cracking. He said, not for a while. Then he said, your father would be proud. No, Raphael said. His voice was hoarse. He'd be furious because I nearly handed this entire harbor to a lawyer who knows how to open a car door. Gus didn't laugh. He looked down at his hands. I'm not talking about the harbor, kid, he said. He learned about the truck by accident one Tuesday afternoon, because Nadia Kowalski was speaking loudly. She was standing at the register, telling Delphine that her cousin knew someone at the Chelsea scrapyard who'd paid $300 and come tow it away themselves. No trouble at all. $300 was still $300, and Delphine was paying $40 a month for a heap of metal that hadn't started in 2 years. Delphine said no. Nadia asked whether she had lost her mind. Delphine said she knew. That afternoon, he walked around behind the laundromat on B Street, and there it was, sitting inside a faded white parking space between a delivery truck and an industrial dumpster. A 1994 Ford F-150. Blue paint faded to the color of a November sky, rust running along the rear wheel well. One side mirror held on with tape. All 4 tires were flat. A parking permit was taped to the windshield with clear tape, and the date on it was for that month. Delphine came outside at 5 o'clock carrying a garbage bag, and she saw him standing there. She didn't look surprised. She threw the bag into the dumpster and stood beside him. $40 a month, he said. Yeah, for 2 years. 2 years and 3 months, she said. Why? Delphine Marchetti looked at the truck. She didn't answer for about 10 seconds. Then she spoke very softly, and she spoke to the truck rather than to him. Because my mother died in the hospital. The wind rolled a food wrapper across the lot. I wasn't there, she said. She raised one hand and placed her palm on the hood. There was rust beneath it, and a thin layer flaked away against her skin, but she didn't pull her hand back. She drove it for 22 years, she said. She smoked inside it, even though she quit when I was 10. But the smell had already soaked into the upholstery. She kept a tin of breath mints in the glove compartment. She hung a wooden ring from the mirror. I sat in the passenger seat through all of high school. She opened the door. The hinge creaked. She didn't climb inside. She only stood there with one hand resting on the frame. Lean in, she said. He leaned inside. The interior was dark, the cloth seat cracked, and there was a smell. Old cigarettes, peppermint candy. sunlight that had baked the dashboard plastic for 22 years. He straightened. She closed the door. That truck is the last place in this world that still smells like her, she said. The day I sell it is the day my mother truly dies. Then she went back inside. Rafael Castellano remained in that parking lot for about 15 minutes. He could repair it. He could make one telephone call, and 4 men would arrive the next morning with a tow truck. And 3 weeks later the truck would start again, freshly painted, with new upholstery, and it would run for another 20 years. He stood there thinking about it, and he understood that if he did that, the cracked cloth seat would be replaced, the dashboard would be cleaned, and the smell inside would disappear within 4 hours, and no one in the world could ever buy it back. He did nothing. 3 weeks later, on Saturday morning, Delphine Marchetti went out to the lot to tape up the new parking permit. There was already one on the windshield. She bent closer to look. She lifted it nearer to her face. It wasn't a monthly permit. It was something else printed on heavier paper, bearing the name of the lot, the space number, the truck's license plate, and a line with a date. Paid through March of 2046. She straightened. She looked at it once more. 20 years, $9,600. No name, no letter, nothing at all. She asked the owner of the lot. He said someone had bank transfer. He didn't know who. He had only received the money and printed the permit. For the next 20 years, that truck still wouldn't start. It would remain in that exact place, gathering more rust, its tires sinking flatter, and no one would come to tow it away. That was the entire meaning of $9,600. It was the smallest amount Rafael Castellano had spent in 20 years, and it was the greatest gift he had ever given anyone, and it didn't repair a single thing. Delphine Marchetti stood in the parking lot behind the laundromat at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning. She placed both palms on the rusted hood. Then she lowered her head. 3 years. That was the first time. Inside the 9th floor desk drawer was an envelope, and inside the envelope were $11,000 in cash. It had been there for 3 years, small bills, emergency money, the kind of sum a man like him kept in a drawer the way another person might hide a spare key beneath a doormat. Rafael Castellano opened that drawer 3 times in 1 week. 3 times he looked at the envelope. 3 times he closed it again. He thought about a night in April. She had lost a shift because someone had made a scheduling mistake, and she had stood in the kitchen for about 4 minutes with her back to the door and both hands gripping the edge of the sink, and he had heard her. That night, he left $200 beneath the plate. The next morning, she waited for him at the door. She handed the $200 bill back to him, folded into quarters, and she said, "I sell coffee. I don't sell pity." $4.50. He closed the drawer for the 3rd time and called Beatrix into the room. "That internal industry file," he said. "The kind the large accounting firms share among themselves. Notes about former employees. I know it," she said. "My name was once in something similar. Is it legal?" Beatrix sat down. "No," she said, "not remotely. It violates the Federal Fair Credit Reporting Act, Section 1681, because in practice it functions as a consumer reporting agency without registering, without notifying the subjects, without giving them a right to respond, and without any correction process. It also violates 4 other laws in this state. It has been illegal since the first day it existed. Then why does it still exist? Because to bring it down, someone has to sue," she said. "And the people whose names appear in it are the very people who have just lost their careers because of it. They don't have $60,000 in 3 years. That is the entire design. It only feeds on people who can't afford to fight back." Raphael wrote a name on a sheet of paper and pushed it toward her. "Find me an employment attorney," he said. "Not in Boston. No one who has ever worked for me. No one who knows who I am. Pay 3 years of fees in advance. Send it through 3 layers, and if that attorney manages to trace it back to me, then you chose the wrong person." Beatrix looked at the name. "The attorney will ask who the client is." "There is no client," Raphael said. "There is an illegal practice, and there is someone paying to make it stop. Tell the attorney to sue the file itself. Not on behalf of one person. Sue the entire file." 3 weeks later, a consortium of 4 accounting firms in New England received a letter from a law office in Hartford, and 11 days after that, the entire file was taken down, and every name inside it was erased at the same time. There were 437 names. Not one of those 437 people was notified, because the file had never notified anyone in the first place. The following month, Delphine Murray received a telephone call. A company in Quincy, 14 employees, doing bookkeeping for small medical practices. The caller said they still had her application from 3 years earlier, that they were hiring, and that they couldn't understand why they hadn't called her back at the time. She thought it was luck. She went to the interview wearing the only outfit she owned that wasn't a uniform. She got the job. She still worked the night shift at Ollie's 3 nights a week because she needed to finish paying the collection agency. And during the day she went to Quincy and she slept 4 hours, and she lived that way for 6 months. The company's insurance covered the surgery. Delphine Marchetti paid for her own eye, with her own work. With the 3.5 years she had spent studying, and the semester she had repeated in night classes. With the 41 applications she had submitted and the refusal to give up. She never learned who had removed her name from that file, and she never would, because the other 436 people didn't know either. Gus asked him one afternoon in the car, "Why don't you tell the girl?" Raphael looked through the window. "Because if she knows," he said, "then that eye is something I gave her. If she doesn't know, then it belongs to her." Gus said nothing. "I've spent my entire life buying things, Gus," he said. "This is the first time I've paid for something I don't get to own." 3 days after the surgery, Delphine Marchetti sat at table 2 at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, with a square of white gauze taped over her left eye and a strip of bandage running diagonally across her temple. The doctor had told her to rest for 2 weeks. She lasted 3 days, and on the 4th she walked to the diner because the room above the laundromat was too quiet. When Mr. Ollie saw her, he said nothing. He only pushed a cup of tea across the counter and told her to sit somewhere out of the sunlight. The sun came through the front window and cut a golden band across the vinyl floor. Teddy Kowalski sat in the chair opposite her, 9 years old since the previous month, coloring a picture of a cat with 6 legs, and the little girl was explaining with great seriousness that it wasn't a mistake, it was a special cat. The door opened, the bell rang. Micah Marchetti stood there, 19 years old, taller than she remembered, wearing a denim jacket with an oil stain at the wrist, holding something in one hand. He didn't move for about 4 seconds, 14 months. The last time he had spoken to her was over the telephone on the 2nd anniversary of their mother's death, and he had said only one sentence before hanging up. The sentence had been, "You send me money because you're too afraid to send an apology." After that, she had continued sending him $400 every month. He walked to the table. He placed the object on its surface between her and the box of colored pencils, a savings passbook. Paper, old-fashioned, the kind banks still printed for people who didn't use an application. She looked at it. She didn't pick it up. $5,600, he said. "You can count it, I know," she said. He remained standing. "I didn't withdraw a single dollar, I know," she said. "I check the balance every month." He nodded once, very slightly. Then he said, "I didn't need your money, I know. I needed you to come," he said. His voice wasn't loud. "That night I needed you to come." Delphine Marchetti sat perfectly still. "I know," she said. At the next table, a colored pencil rolled onto the floor, and Teddy bent down to pick it up, and Nadia called from the counter for the little girl to come help her mother arrange the bottles of hot sauce. And Teddy gathered her box of pencils, ran to the other side of the room, and sat at the counter in the sunlight with her back turned, continuing to color the cat's tail. Micah didn't sit. He stood beside the table with his hands hanging at his sides, looking down at the formica surface. "I was 16, he said. She didn't move. "I had to sign the paper you were supposed to sign," he said. "They handed me the pen. They asked whether I was ready. I said yes." He stopped. "I said yes because I thought you would get there in time. I thought you were on your way. I thought you would and tell me I had done the right thing." He looked up. "You didn't come." The refrigerator hummed inside the diner. Teddy said something to her mother at the far end of the room, and Nadia laughed. "So for 3 years," Micah said, "I haven't known whether I did the right thing or the wrong thing." Delphine Marchetti stood. She rose slowly because her head still spun when she stood too quickly, and she placed one hand on the back of the chair, looked at her younger brother with her remaining eye. She didn't apologize. "You gave Mom peace, Micah," she said. He didn't move. "The doctor wrote that exact word in her medical record," she said. "It wasn't my word, it was his. He wrote it at 4:10 in the morning, and he signed his name beneath it. I've read it 400 times in 3 years. I keep a copy in the bottom drawer beneath the bills, and I take it out and read it every time I can't sleep. And I haven't slept very much, she breathed out. You did the right thing. You did the most right thing anyone in our family has ever done. Micah stood there. His eyes reddened, but he didn't cry, and neither did she. Then why didn't you tell me, he asked. 3 years. Why didn't you tell me? Delphine Marchetti didn't answer immediately. She looked down at the savings passbook lying on the table. Because I wasn't brave enough, she said. Because saying it aloud meant I had to admit something. I had to admit that I let my 16-year-old brother do the thing I was supposed to do. She stopped, and I couldn't admit it, Micah. I couldn't, so I sent money. $400 a month. Because $400 was easier. Micah Marchetti looked at his sister for about 5 seconds. Then he pulled out the chair and sat down. He said nothing. He only sat there with both hands resting on his thighs, staring at the tabletop. Delphine went behind the counter. She took a cup from the shelf. She came around on the right side, turned the cup upright, and poured. She placed it in front of him near the right edge of the table, then sat in the chair opposite him. No one said anything. The afternoon sunlight slowly shifted from the center of the floor toward the foot of the counter. At the other end of the room, Teddy held up her picture for her mother to see, and Nadia said something, and the little girl laughed. The coffee machine made one sound, then stopped. Mr. Ollie passed carrying a stack of plates and didn't ask a single question. 3 minutes passed, then 4. Micah Marchetti lifted the cup of coffee. He drank. Some reconciliations have no words, only a cup of coffee, and 2 people sitting together long enough to remember that they are still family. The message came through her attorney, on letterhead, 1 line, with no greeting and no signature. Don't let the boy know my name. Rafael Castellano read it 3 times. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for leniency. She didn't ask to see him in the 4 months since the night at Anchorage Hall. Those were the first words Sloane Ashford had sent him, and she asked for only one thing, and it was the only thing that proved there had once been a time when she had been human. She isn't afraid of prison, he said to Beatrix. She wasn't charged. She's afraid of 18 years from now, he said. She's afraid of the day that boy sits in some room and types his mother's name into a machine. He could have made that happen. He had every right to do it. He had 7 newspapers that would print anything he gave them, and he had a recording the entire city had heard. And he had 34 attorneys. He didn't do it. Not because he forgave her. Because during those 4 months he had kept thinking about one thing, that Marguerite Ashford hadn't been born that way, that somewhere very long ago, that woman had taken something from her daughter and called it discipline. And the daughter had learned the lesson very well, and now there was a child about to be born who would be taught the same lesson. That chain could only end if someone refused to keep teaching it. He didn't forgive her. He simply refused to pass it on. 4 months after the party, on a Tuesday evening, his telephone rang from an unfamiliar number. A public hospital in Brockton. They called him because his name was still listed in the emergency contact box of an old file that no one had bothered to update. Premature birth, 3 weeks early, no private room, no flowers, no visitors. Beatrix sat in the front seat, and she turned to look at him over her shoulder. You don't owe her anything, she said. Gus was driving. He didn't take his eyes off the road. He doesn't owe her anything, he said. But the boy doesn't owe anyone yet. Raphael didn't enter Sloane's room. He walked down the 4th floor corridor and stopped before a glass window, and inside were 6 incubators, and in the 3rd one from the left was a baby weighing 4 pounds and 10 ounces, wrapped in a blue and white striped blanket like every child in every hospital across America. He was asleep. He wasn't Raphael's blood. He was the child of the woman who had stood inside a dressing room in Beacon Hill and said the baby was too. Rafael Castellano stood there, with both hands in the pockets of his coat, and watched him breathe. A nurse came out carrying a clipboard, and she looked at him. Are you the father? He didn't answer immediately. He looked at the 3rd incubator for a very long time. No, he said. I'm only the person who came to make sure the boy is all right. Before leaving, he placed an envelope at the reception desk and said it belonged in the child's file. There was no money inside. Inside were the documents for an education trust that had been completed 2 weeks earlier. Irrevocable, impossible to withdraw from, impossible to borrow against, impossible to transfer. Sloane Ashford couldn't touch it. Marguerite Ashford couldn't touch it. Rafael Castellano couldn't touch it. Only one person in the world would be allowed to open it, on one single day, when that person turned 18. The only condition written into it, in legal language so tightly instructed that waitresses had read it 3 times before signing as a witness, was that the boy must never be told who had created it. On the drive home, Gus asked him why. Raphael looked through the window as the highway lights passed across his face in steady intervals. Because his mother taught him that people can cross a bridge and leave you behind, he said. I want there to be at least one thing in that boy's life that proves the opposite. He was silent for a moment. Even if he never knows. 6 months later, at 2:47 in the morning, Ollie's on Congress Street still had the neon sign with half the letter I burned out, and no one had bothered to fix it. Delphine Marchetti worked the night shift 2 nights a week now, not because she needed to, but because she liked it, and because Mr. Ollie was 71 years old and had no one to cover Tuesday and Thursday nights. During the day, she worked in Quincy. On Monday and Wednesday evenings, she attended night school in Dorchester for 1 semester, the final semester she had abandoned 4 years earlier, and she paid the tuition with her own credit card, and that mattered, and she would finish paying pension off in another 11 months. Micah drove her there 2 nights a week. He still hadn't withdrawn a single dollar from that passbook. At table 2, beneath the fluorescent lights, Teddy Kowalski was doing her math homework while waiting for her mother's shift to end, chewing on the end of her pencil, and every so often the little girl looked up to ask a question, and Delphi answered from behind the counter without needing to look down at the workbook. The door opened, the bell rang. The man in the charcoal gray suit walked in and sat at table 6, the one with its back to the wall and a clear view of both exits. She picked up the coffee pot. She came around on the right, placed the tray at the right edge of the table, turned the cup upright, and poured. There was no kiss, no declaration of love. In the 13 months he had sat at that table, Raphael Castellano had never once touched her hand, and she had never once asked him about Weston, about the 22 rooms, or about anything printed on the front page of the Globe. She set down the coffee pot. Do you know why I still call you table 6? She asked. He looked up. Because you don't remember my face, he said. Delphine Marchetti looked at him with her right eye, and with the left eye a doctor in Quincy had saved 6 months earlier through the insurance from a job she believed she had received by luck. No, she said. Because I remember. Then she's walked away. She didn't explain. She took 14 steps toward the counter without touching the 3rd stool, then bent down to show Teddy where she had gone wrong on the 4th problem. He sat there with his coffee. He sat for a long time. She returned 15 minutes later, looked at the cup, and said, Your coffee's gone cold, table 6. Yeah, he said. He drank it. Raphael Castellano had spent 20 years building an empire no one could touch. He succeeded. That was precisely the problem. Sloane Ashford hadn't broken his system. She had proved that it worked perfectly. A man who never gives anyone who he is will only gather people who want what he has. For 7 months at that table, one woman poured him coffee for $4.50, scolded him for letting it grow cold, made him eat tomatoes, and never asked him a single question. It was the most expensive thing he had ever possessed in his life, and it didn't exist in any contract. If there is one lesson in this story, it isn't to beware of traitors. Traitors will always exist. In every city, in every family, beneath every beautiful suit. The lesson is to notice who treats you kindly when they believe you have nothing, because those are the only people who tell the truth about you. And the second lesson, the one Raphael Castellano needed 20 years and 1 night inside a dressing room to learn, is that respecting around someone doesn't mean rescuing them. It means clearing the road, stepping back, and allowing them to reach the end on their own 2 feet. Even when you're strong enough to carry them there in 3 seconds. Because what people earn for themselves can't be taken away, while anything given always carries a price hidden somewhere in the darkness, and sooner or later, someone will come to collect it. If this story touched something inside you, leave the words table 6 in the comments and tell us how it made you feel, because we read every one of them, and the words you share from the deepest places in your hearts are the reason we continue writing each night. Please leave a like, share sending someone you believe needs to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel so that every day there will be another story waiting for you, like a cup of coffee someone has already poured. We wish everyone watching this video abundant health, a joyful life, peace and serenity every day. Goodbye, and we'll see you again in the next video.